you don't have anything to worry about. All right, so let's go ahead and read. Do I have anybody that would like to help us read? Can I just think about that while I look at the source? So we start each document looking at the sourcing question. So what kind of source is this? It says Constitution of the United States of America, written 1787. So would that make it a primary or a secondary source? Definitely a primary source. Yeah. So that's what we're seeing here. This is a primary source. It is the actual document that we are analyzing in this entire mini-Q, right? The mini-Q says, how did the Constitution guard against tyranny? So this is our second excerpt directly from the Constitution. So go ahead and add that to your annotations. This is a primary source. And again, that's just part of our sourcing questions. It's good to ask that question and know what you're looking at. And so the Constitution has multiple authors, so you don't have an actual author that's cited there, but we know that it was written at the time. Well, it was a Constitution, so that's what we're analyzing. All right, do I have anybody that would like to read Article 1, Section 2 about the House of Representatives? And so this is just, it says Clause 3. So it's just letting you know this is a section of it, specific section. All right, Ashley, go for it. Thank you.
The Clause 3, right? Clause 3, representatives shall be apportioned according to population. The number of representatives shall not exceed 1 for every 30,000, but each state shall have at least 1 representative. And until a census is taken within 3 years, the state of New Hampshire shall be entitled to 3, Massachusetts 8, Rhode Island 1, Connecticut 5, New York 6, New Jersey 4, Pennsylvania 8, Delaware 1, Maryland 6, Virginia 10, North Carolina 5, South Carolina 5, and Georgia 3.
Awesome. Thank you for reading. All right, so now let's break that down. So each document has been about a different topic, right? Document A was talking about the separation of powers between state and federal government. Document B was talked about separation of powers in general, like separating legislative, executive, judicial into 3 separate branches. Document C was focused on not just separation of powers, but checks and balances, so that each of those separate entities can check each other's power. And now this one is talking about the big state, small state. I guess in the end, it ended up in a compromise, but the big state, small state issue. And it was, how do we divide up representation for the states? We have some states with really dense with larger populations. So if it's based on population, then they would overpower the little states. And if we have equal representation for everyone, then in a sense, it's kind of unequal for the big states, because then the little states would have just as much power as they do. And so this was such a heated issue that Rhode Island didn't even show up to those constitutional convention. They didn't show up to the Constitutional Convention. This issue just really troubled them, that they just stayed out of it. And so, and even Delaware was like delayed to get there. So the smaller states were a little concerned about how this was going to play out. So in the end, our Constitution divided up that we would have both options that had been presented, both equal and both unequal representation. And so this first part that we're looking at, I think a good place to start is to look, I'm going to just box in this vocabulary word, apportioned, which I was mispronouncing the last periods, apportioned. So if we actually like separate it, literally it means a portion. Like think of it in that sense, a portion. So like you have a pie, everybody gets a portion of the pie. How are they going to divide up the pie? So in this case, it's telling us that that pie, right, how representation is going to be divided or separated or given out based on population. So I'm actually going to pick a different color. So that's one of our main ideas, right? Representation shall be apportioned according to population. So I think let's add an actual like annotation to what apportioned means. So apportioned means to like divide or to give. I think that's probably good enough. So divide, how is representation going to be divided or given out to each of the states? And then we know that it's done so by population. So what is population? What is population? Like, what is the population of our class right now? There are 26 of you, or actually technically 25 because I'm presenting one on one screen. Yeah, exactly. It's the amount. It is the amount of people. That's what the population is. So in the House of Representatives, representation, how many delegates each state gets, is going to be based on how many people live in each state. So it says the number of representatives should not exceed one for every 30,000. Well, that number will have changed at this point, right? Because in the United States, we have a much larger population than when there were only 13 states. But those were the numbers then. And so it says shall not exceed more than one for every 30,000. So every time you hit 30,000 more people, you got another representative. Is the way that it worked. But each state shall have at least one. So that's a big idea too, right? Each state shall have at least one. So it's based on representation, but everyone is guaranteed to have at least one. So like if your state doesn't even have 30,000 people when this document was written, you still had at least one representative. It didn't matter. You were going to get one. And it says until a census is taken within 3 years. So you guys, last year, Mr. Cuevas and I talked a lot about the census, or enough about the census, hopefully, to help you understand how important it is and how it was important just for our state and even for your family, for your community, right? For California, it meant representation. It means funding. For your local community, it means the same things, right? It means funding as well. And it means that you are properly represented as well. So the census itself is a count of the population. So I think that's worth mentioning as well. So let's add that in. So that is what a census is. I'm going to slide that into place. I guess that works. And I've learned that I can zoom in. So what is a census? A census is a count of the population. So these are our main ideas. Representatives shall be divided or given according to population. Each state has at least one. And then in this case, it's saying within 3 years. And the reason it's saying within 3 years, because this was 1787. And so even today, the census is done every 10 years. So they were 3 years away from getting a brand new count and then updating their numbers. So the information it tells us here is just simply like, this is where we're at as far as numbers are concerned, and this is how many representatives each state gets. And so that's it. Those numbers have definitely changed, right? Now we have 435 representatives. They capped it in that way, like 435, that's the pie, and you divide it up based on the population in each state. This year was kind of the exception when it came to the census, whereas in previous years, it was mailed in, you filled it out, you mailed it back. This year you were able to fill it out online, like I did mine online. And the process was supposed to be semi-done by April. And at that point, then you have someone coming to your door and asking you this information because they again, it's important for each state to have a proper count. And this year again was different because of the pandemic, right? So they actually extended it well into October is when like the official end of the counting was supposed to take place. And it should have ended previously, would have been, I think, I forget, I think it was like May. So they were going to wrap it up well before then, but then the pandemic. All right, so that's kind of the main idea, but I think it's worth putting it into words as well. So let me see. I know I had it elsewhere. So the main idea here, what we just described, let's put it into words as well so that you have it. So our main idea, and I think I did it green, so I'll stick with the green color. It says that our main idea is that in the House, capital H, because House of Representatives, representation is based on how many people live in a state. And each state will have at least one. All right, and I think I can make this a tiny bit bigger. And it should fit perfectly right in this little spot. There we go. I'll zoom that in so that you guys can copy it as well, or you gals and guys. If I can figure out, there we go. So here's our big picture. In the House of Representatives, right? Representation is based on how many people live in a state, and each state will have at least one. And that is true still today. So even states with smaller populations, they are all guaranteed at least one delegate. I'll give you a moment to copy that down. All right, so let's move on and let's read Article 1, Section 3. Does anybody want to help read that part for us, please? All right, go for it, Annabelle. Thank you.
The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state chosen by the legislatures thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote.
Right, this one's a lot like just straightforward, right? So what's our big picture? I'm going to zoom out so I can get my tools back in here. Our main idea, so it says the Senate shall be composed of, you get 2 senators from each state. That's what makes up the Senate. So now that we have 50 states, we have 100 senators. So then they had 13 states, they would have had 26 senators is the way that it would have looked like. So it's equal representation regardless of your population. So a state like California, so California, for example, I had gotten the numbers wrong when I explained it. I said we had 53. We have 53 representatives in the House of Representatives. We have 2 senators. So add that up, we have 55 total delegates. And so the same is true for the Electoral College. That's how the electors, the electors match the representatives for your state. It's not the same people, but the numbers match. So it gives us another detail, though. It says that they have their position for 6 years. So once elected, they're in place for 6 years. And the difference in the House, which I think when we're reading chapter 6, it explained that in the House of Representatives, it's only a 2-year term. So you have what's seen as like an upper house, lower house, and you see this actually play out in other countries as well. Even in Great Britain, in Parliament, they have the upper house, the lower house. So in this case, there's the more elite one, right? The Senate would be that. You're in there for 6 years. It's only 100 people, and so it's a much smaller group. Whereas in the House of Representatives, you have 435 people. It's a 2-year term. There's a much higher like turnaround. You have a lot of new people coming in and going. So our main idea here is that, and I think that's good enough, right? The Senate has 2 senators for each state. So you get equal representation for each of the states. So we could go ahead and add that in as well. Capital S, because it just is. In the Senate, every state gets 2 senators. Ivan, you're here, so I'm glad you're here. I'll give you the links right now, which I think I still have them. You can go ahead and take the attendance, open up the Nearpod. I'll leave it up here anyways so that you can see it. One other thing that I thought was helpful for me was to add a visual as well. So we can go ahead and add that also. So I'm going to just type in Senate and House. Oh, that's not what I got yesterday. Okay. Congress. How about that? Okay. It gave us the congressional building. That's fine. So this is actually where the Senate and the House meets. And so that's something that's a good visual to have as well. So you have on one side the Senate, on the other side the House. And that's something that we can add in. So this is our lawmaking body in the United States. These are the legislators. Trying to find a good spot. There we go. Okay, and I'll leave this. I'll leave this here. If you guys are still, there we go. It went away. Okay, if you guys are still copying it, I'll leave it up here. But I want you guys to take a few moments to now go and then answer the questions. So in Google Classroom, it's going back to assignment 40 is what we're doing. And I think, I don't know if I must have closed out Google Classroom. I'm not seeing it. Oh, here it is. Okay, so I'm going to give you the link to assignment 40, and then your task is to answer the questions for document D. And by assignment 40, I mean this. So we're going back to this thing. Oops. There we go. You're going back to your mini Q. Document D. Oh, I did add the doc A annotations. Okay, I guess I was kind of putting things in more than one place so that you guys hopefully would be able to find them. Yeah. So if you are, like I mentioned, if you are not caught up, because you should be all done with step 2 at this point. Yes, Miss Leticia, I'll go back. Sorry. If you are not all caught up with step 2, then I would highly recommend that you spend your weekend getting caught up, because next week we are going to do the writing part. And just a reminder, except for document A, there are videos for all of these, and they're all linked in Google Classroom. If you look at each of the annotation documents, it's us reading, analyzing, annotating, and that should help you get a better understanding of each of the documents. So again, your task for the next 10 minutes, or I guess you have 12 minutes, and then we'll review. So you have 12 minutes to answer the questions. You have a word bank, and we review them. So there's no reason to not do them unless you're like napping in the middle of class, which you should not be. Okay, so I'm going to go on mute. You guys get to work.